The night was alive with flashing red and blue lights, sirens blaring into the humid air. A crowd had gathered along the empty street, drawn by the chaos, their phones out, capturing every moment. Cops shouted orders at one another, their voices harsh, sharp, and filled with frustration. Tires screeched, radios crackled with static commands, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. Every sound seemed amplified: the bark of a stray dog, the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through the alleyways, but nothing could compete with the raw, human anger radiating from the officers. In the middle of the storm, Manny Pacquiao stood perfectly still. His eyes scanned the scene, calm and calculating, as if time itself had slowed around him. He didn't flinch at the shouting. He didn't step back when one officer's boot connected harshly with his dog's side. The animal yelped, startled, stumbling slightly, but Manny's hand shot out to steady it, gentle and precise. The officers laughed, assuming this was fear, assuming the silence was weakness. One of them, the tallest, with a uniform slightly too tight over bulging arms, swaggered forward, chest puffed, a sneer on his face. "Step aside, old man," he barked, voice dripping with contempt. "This isn't your street." Manny's eyes didn't leave his dog. His jaw was tight, lips pressed together. He breathed slowly, almost imperceptibly, but there was an edge to his calm that made the air around him feel charged. His dog looked up at him, confused but unafraid, sensing its master's unwavering presence. "You don't have to do this," Manny said, his voice low but firm. It cut through the sirens and shouting, leaving a strange silence in its wake. Some of the bystanders leaned in closer, curiosity piqued. The officer ignored him, smirking. "Oh, I definitely have to do this," the man spat. "Think you're special or something." "Huh." The officer raised his hand, meant to push Manny aside, maybe provoke, maybe intimidate. But Manny didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, as if his body itself were ready, not to attack, but to respond with precision. The dog barked, startled again, moving instinctively between Manny and the officer. And that's when it happened. The officer, thinking the dog was an obstacle, kicked at it, a hard nudge to scare it away. The dog yelped, skidded sideways, but no bones were broken, no blood spilled. It landed safely on its feet, shaking slightly, looking to Manny for reassurance. And Manny gave it just that, a firm, commanding look, almost a silent promise that no harm would come again. The street froze for a heartbeat. No one spoke. Even the flashing lights seemed muted, as if the world was holding its breath. Manny remained motionless, the calmest figure in a storm of chaos. He didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't lunge forward. But the subtle intensity of his stance, the cold focus in his eyes, made it clear that he was not a man to be underestimated. "Do you always let people push you around like this?" the officer sneered, leaning closer. Manny's gaze finally lifted, meeting the officer's. And in that moment, silence descended. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the realization that this man, this quiet, unassuming man, was nothing like what they expected. His presence was measured, disciplined, deadly without a single move. The crowd could feel it, shivering in their shoes, phones shaking in their hands as they recorded. Then Manny spoke, calm and deliberate. "You have no idea what you've done." "Not yet. But you will." And with that, the officers had no clue. They thought they were just confronting a retired boxer, a celebrity maybe, someone famous but harmless. They had no idea that every move, every instinct, every calm breath of this man was born from years of lethal training. That the man they disrespected in front of a crowd, who let them humiliate him in silence, was something far more dangerous. A small, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of Manny's mouth hinted at a storm that had yet to break. And the officers? They were standing right in the middle of it, completely blind to the consequences. Because the man in front of them wasn't just Manny Pacquiao. He was the most lethal Delta Force commander alive. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The street had quieted down slightly after the initial chaos, though the red and blue lights still flashed intermittently, reflecting off wet asphalt and parked cars. A few scattered bystanders lingered at the edges, whispering and craning their necks to see more of the confrontation, phones still raised. In the midst of this uneasy calm, Manny Pacquiao stood, his dog now safely beside him, leash loosely held in one hand. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and black jogging pants, simple sneakers on his feet, blending in with the crowd of onlookers. Nothing about him screamed fame or danger. To anyone glancing quickly, he could have been just another ordinary man on an evening walk. But those who paid attention would notice the subtle discipline in his posture, the controlled rhythm of his breathing, the quiet alertness in his stance. He exuded calm strength, not showy, not intimidating, just presence. His dog wagged its tail hesitantly, sensing the lingering tension in the air. Manny crouched slightly, patting its head gently, straightening the leash with a careful tug. It was a small human gesture, one that revealed tenderness but also command, a bond between master and companion, unspoken yet undeniable. Two officers approached slowly from the other side of the street. They were in standard patrol uniforms, guns holstered, badges gleaming in the flashing lights. Their boots clacked against the pavement with a confidence that quickly became arrogance. What should have been a routine neighborhood patrol had escalated into a power display, their eyes scanning for any excuse to assert authority. One officer, broad-shouldered and loud, raised his voice unnecessarily, shouting at a distant car that had slowed to watch the scene. "Move along. Nothing to see here." His partner, taller but lankier, gave an exaggerated nod of approval, smirking as they strode closer. They weren't here to serve or protect. Not really. They were here to dominate, to remind the neighborhood who held control. And when they saw Manny standing there, calm, polite, and unobtrusive, it seemed almost insulting to them. "Hey, old man," the loud one called out, pointing at Manny's simple clothing and small frame. "What are you doing here? Walking your little mutt in my neighborhood." Manny straightened slowly, his hands now fully holding the leash, keeping the dog close to his side. His voice was soft but deliberate, carrying across the street without a hint of fear. "I'm just walking," he said. "There's no need for shouting. We can keep this peaceful." The officers exchanged glances, barely hiding their amusement. To them, humility and politeness were weakness, signs that a man could be pushed, intimidated, or laughed at. The mocking grins on their faces widened. "Oh, we love peaceful," the tall one said, stepping closer and leaning in. "You're just standing there like some wannabe fighter or civilian thinking you belong. You better move along before things get messy." Manny's eyes didn't dart around. He didn't step back. Instead, they locked onto the taller officer, calm but carrying an unmistakable intensity. His hand gave a slight pat to the dog's head, a gesture that seemed harmless to anyone else but carried meaning to anyone trained in discipline and control. It was both reassurance and command, the kind that communicated, "Stay calm, stay safe, I have this." The dog tilted its head, tail stiffening slightly as it read the tension. Manny kept his hand firm yet gentle, fingers brushing over the fur, eyes never leaving the officers. "There's no need to escalate," he said. "We can all walk away from this without anyone getting hurt." The officers laughed, loudly, cruelly, as if the calm words themselves were an insult. "Getting scared yet, old man?" sneered the broad one. "Or is this how wannabe fighters negotiate? With pets and pleasantries?" Manny's jaw tightened just slightly, a fraction of a movement unnoticed by the casual observer but registered by anyone who could read discipline. There was a flicker of pain in his eyes, not physical, but the quiet sting of injustice and unnecessary cruelty. His dog had been hurt, even briefly, and it resonated deeply with him. And yet, his face remained composed, voice measured, giving nothing away. The taller officer took a step forward, boots clicking against the concrete, his shadow falling across Manny. "You think that little mutt of yours means anything?" he mocked, gesturing toward the dog. "I don't see why anyone would care about some stray-looking thing. Or maybe you're just attached, huh? Poor old man, dreaming he can protect anything." Manny didn't respond immediately. He tightened his grip on the leash, letting his presence speak louder than words. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. But in that quiet, controlled silence, the weight of his skill and experience radiated outward, palpable even to bystanders who knew nothing of his past. The officers still smiled, unaware. They still believed they were in control. They still assumed this man could be provoked, intimidated, or ignored. They didn't know that every gesture, every breath, every steady heartbeat of Manny's carried decades of lethal training. They didn't know that under his calm exterior was a force they couldn't begin to comprehend. And as the night air thickened with tension, The dog at Manny's side, tail lowered but still alert, and the officer's smirk stretching wider in ignorance. One thing was clear. The officers still had no idea who they were provoking. Not yet. The quiet tension of the street shattered in an instant as Manny's voice cut through the flickering sirens and murmurs of the crowd. "Why did you hurt my dog?" His tone was calm, steady, deliberate, every word measured, carrying authority without aggression. His gaze was fixed, unflinching, on the officers who had assumed dominance mere moments ago. The dog, now closer to him, barked once, low and cautious, sensing the rising tension in its master. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The officers blinked, surprised by the composure in Manny's voice. They had expected panic, fear, maybe even tears. Instead, they found himself staring down a man who radiated control, a quiet force that demanded attention without raising a hand. The tall, broad officer smirked, stepping forward with a predatory confidence. "You've got some nerve, old man," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Talking to us like that. Thinking we'll apologize for nothing? Think again." His partner, equally arrogant, circled Manny slowly, like a wolf testing its prey. "Yeah, you think you're some kind of hero? Some fighter who can scare us into being nice?" He laughed. "Newsflash, you're just a civilian. Maybe this is your first real lesson in respect." Manny's jaw didn't tighten. He didn't flinch. He only held the dog closer, his free hand brushing its head lightly, a gesture of reassurance, of connection. "There is a lesson here," he said softly, almost as if to himself. "It's about restraint and respect. You seem to have forgotten both." The officers snorted, circling closer, emboldened. The crowd around them began to murmur, phones raised, recording every word. A few onlookers stepped back nervously, sensing the tension rising like static electricity. The cops didn't care. They thrived on intimidation, on power, on proving dominance in front of witnesses. "You think you're untouchable?" the taller one sneered, reaching out to push Manny lightly, just enough to test him. It was a calculated motion, intended to provoke fear, force him off balance, assert superiority. But Manny didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a step. His body remained perfectly aligned, his posture steady. He absorbed the push with a subtle shift, his eyes never leaving theirs. It was as though he was rooted to the ground, unshakable, an immovable force within a storm of petty aggression. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "Who is he?" one woman muttered. "That man. He's not scared." "Look at him. He's calm, too calm," someone else added. The officer's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but pride quickly reclaimed his expression. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" he barked, voice now sharp, commanding attention. Manny's response was quiet, deceptively gentle. "No. The real question is, do you?" His eyes gleamed with a depth the officers didn't understand, a controlled intensity that could crush egos and bones alike if unleashed. The words hung in the humid air, echoing off walls, bouncing between the pavement and the streetlights. The murmuring of the crowd grew to a tense hum, a static backdrop to the silent storm. Even the dog seemed aware, standing still, ears perked, eyes fixed on the unfolding standoff. The officers, insulted and confused, began to escalate. Voices raised, accusations thrown, commands shouted with increasing desperation. They reached instinctively for their weapons, holsters jingling as fingers brushed the triggers. Each movement was calculated but reckless. They believed they had the upper hand. But the crowd froze at the sudden motion, phones shaking as recordings captured the impending clash. A few gasps echoed, like the sound of a countdown before disaster. The tension was so thick it seemed almost visible, electric, suffocating, inescapable. Manny remained still, a calm anchor in the middle of chaos. His gaze swept across the officers, measuring, assessing, calculating. The dog stayed at his side, instinctively mirroring his calm focus. Every muscle in Manny's body was coiled, ready to respond if necessary, but controlled by years of discipline, years of lethal precision. "You should step back," he said softly, almost a whisper, but it carried authority that made even bystanders flinch. "There is still a way to resolve this without regret. But you are running out of time." The officers' eyes flicked toward each other, a brief moment of hesitation. Their confidence, which had fueled their arrogance, wavered just enough for the first doubt to creep in. And that doubt was all Manny needed, not to attack, not yet, but to let them know the balance of power had already shifted. He didn't move a hand, didn't make a threat, didn't even raise his voice. Yet, the quiet intensity in his stance, the deadly calm in his gaze, and the subtle authority in his words were a warning more potent than any drawn weapon could convey. The taller officer's hand hovered over his holster, and the broad one mirrored the motion, eyes narrowing. The air seemed to pulse with tension, every second stretching, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. But before either officer could touch their holsters, the truth was about to hit them harder than any punch ever could. The street held its breath. The crowd froze. Even the dog's tail stopped wagging. And in that suspended moment, the officers had no idea what force they had provoked. The street seemed to exhale, though no one had realized it was holding its breath in the first place. Every siren, every shout, every flicker of flashing red and blue lights was drowned out by a sudden, almost supernatural silence. The chaos that had dominated the scene moments ago now seemed distant, irrelevant, eclipsed by a force nobody could yet name. Manny Pacquiao shifted his weight ever so slightly, a motion so subtle most onlookers wouldn't have noticed if not for the tension hanging in the air. But those who knew discipline, those who had ever been trained to recognize lethal control, would have felt it immediately. This was not a boxing stance, not a street fighter's posture, this was Delta Force precision. Every muscle, every joint, every inch of his body was calibrated for control and response. He took a single step forward. Slow. Measured. Controlled. A step that seemed to compress time itself. The dog at his side moved instinctively, mirroring the rhythm of his motion, tail low but alert. The crowd stiffened, phones wavered in their hands, and gasps barely audible fluttered through the spectators. There was something primal about the scene, something that went beyond recognition or celebrity. This man, calm, quiet, unassuming, radiated an aura of lethal mastery, and suddenly, everyone could sense it. The officers froze, mid-motion. Their confident swagger faltered. The broad one's smirk twitched, almost imperceptibly. The taller officer's jaw clenched as a cold realization began to creep in. The man they thought they were confronting, the man they had mocked and pushed, was not ordinary. He was far from ordinary. Bystanders whispered among themselves, voices low but urgent, carrying snippets of fear and astonishment. "Wait. I've seen that man before," one murmured, eyes wide. "That's not just Manny Pacquiao," said another, voice trembling slightly. "This isn't a fighter. It's like, he's trained, military trained." Even the dog seemed to sense the shift, ears erect, body tense, yet unwaveringly loyal. It stayed close to Manny, moving as if one with him, an extension of the control he exuded. The officer's confidence, once loud and brash, began to crumble. The taller one's fingers twitched, almost reaching for his holster, but stopped mid-motion, a cold sweat forming along his temples. Their previous arrogance, their laughter, their mockery, all vanished in an instant. Fear replaced ego, uncertainty replaced aggression. They were no longer the hunters. They were prey, blind to the predator in plain sight. Manny's eyes swept over the officers slowly, deliberately, reading their intentions, measuring their reactions, predicting every potential movement. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or gesture violently. He didn't need to. The room, the street, the crowd, the very air around them, seemed to bend to his calm authority. He finally spoke, his voice low and unwavering, carrying a weight that demanded obedience. "Stand down. Last warning." Every word hung in the air like a blade poised above their heads. The officers froze completely, their bodies stiff, hearts hammering in chests they couldn't control. The tallest one swallowed hard, mouth dry, trying to find a response, any response, but none came. His partner's hands shook ever so slightly, betraying the composure he had clung to moments ago. The crowd grew even quieter. Phones paused mid-recording. People instinctively stepped back, giving Manny and the officers space as if acknowledging, on some deep, primal level, the magnitude of the moment. Eyes darted around, seeking context, trying to understand, but the intensity radiating from Manny left little room for interpretation. Then came the subtle signs that confirmed what the officers hadn't yet realized. The minute control in his stance, the taut precision of his arms, the coiled readiness in every step. Not a boxer's swagger. Not a celebrity's flair. Delta Force. Trained for decades. Calmly lethal. Bystanders exchanged glances, murmurs spreading like wildfire through the crowd. I think he's military, one whispered. No, elite military, another corrected, voice trembling. That's why he's not moving. That's why he's untouchable. The officers glanced at each other, panic rising behind their eyes, the last threads of arrogance snapping. Every instinct screamed retreat, but pride and shame held them frozen. They were caught, exposed to a reality far beyond their assumptions. And Manny, still calm, still perfectly composed, was the storm they had no defense against. The dog stayed perfectly at his side, alert but silent, a living testament to the man's control. The crowd, sensing the climax of the tension, seemed to shrink into the street itself, waiting, watching, unable to breathe. And in the midst of all this suspended time, Manny finally exhaled slightly, just enough to let the officers understand the finality of his warning. Stand down. Last warning. The silence stretched, thick as smoke, as the officers hesitated, terror replacing bravado. They were caught in a moment they couldn't escape, a lesson they didn't know they were about to learn. The reveal was coming. The crowd didn't yet know what was about to unfold. The officers didn't yet know who they had provoked. And Manny, calm, composed, deadly, waited, knowing that the truth, a force far stronger than any street authority, far stronger than any insult, would soon make itself known. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Time slowed, breaths held collectively by the crowd. Every eye, every camera, every beating heart in the street felt it. The balance of power had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. The street, still thick with tension, shuddered slightly as a deep rumble rolled in from the distance. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable over the quiet gasps of the crowd. Then, a sleek black SUV appeared, tires gliding over the asphalt with an authority that seemed to command the street itself. Its windows were tinted, reflecting the flashing lights from the patrol cars, and the vehicle slowed to a stop mere feet from where Manny Pacquiao stood, calm and composed. The doors of the SUV opened simultaneously, and 3 federal agents stepped out. Each moved with precision, efficiency, and a confidence that only comes from years of elite training. Their eyes were sharp, scanning the scene, but the moment they saw Manny, every motion seemed to pause, as though the air itself acknowledged the significance of his presence. The lead agent, tall and rigid, snapped a crisp salute, his face a mask of respect and urgency. "Commander Pacquiao, sir, we came as fast as we could." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The officers, who had moments ago laughed, pushed, and mocked, froze in absolute horror. Their faces drained of color, mouths opening slightly, then snapping shut, unable to form coherent words. Their hands, which had been hovering over holsters moments before, now trembled involuntarily. The agent's gaze swept over the officers, voice steady but commanding. "Gentlemen, you didn't just assault a civilian. You assaulted the most decorated Delta Force commander alive." The words hit like a hammer. The crowd seemed to gasp collectively, some stepping back instinctively, others frozen mid-recording on their phones. Whispers rippled through the bystanders. "Oh God! Wait, that's him. The Delta Force commander." The officers shifted, one stepping backward, the other clutching his belt as if the sudden weight of reality might crush him. Their bravado was gone, replaced entirely by fear, shame, and disbelief. They had underestimated the quiet man in front of them, mistaking humility for weakness, and now they were faced with the stark truth of their mistake. Manny, still calm, adjusted his grip on the dog's leash, the animal looking up at him with a quiet trust that only deepened the human drama unfolding around them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't boast about medals, missions, or accomplishments. He didn't need to. The respect, fear, and understanding in the air were earned without a single flash of aggression. Instead, Manny's gaze shifted back to the officers, his voice low, deliberate, but carrying the weight of consequence. "You hurt what was innocent. That is what must be corrected." The officers exchanged terrified glances. Every instinct screamed retreat. Every thought screamed apology. The taller officer's knees trembled. The broad one's hands shook as he took a hesitant step back. There were no words adequate enough to undo the humiliation, the error, the ignorance they had displayed. The agent beside Manny spoke again, voice firm but precise. "Commander, they did not recognize you. But now they understand." Gentlemen, I suggest you step aside and comply fully, or the consequences will be severe. Manny nodded slightly, eyes never leaving the officers. His stance remained calm, composed, perfectly balanced, the same lethal precision that had kept him alive in countless missions, now a silent warning to these men who had assumed they were untouchable. The dog barked softly, almost as if punctuating the moment, and Manny looked down at it, brushing its fur with a gentle hand. "This is about justice," he said, almost to himself, almost too soft for the chaos of sirens and murmurs around them. "Not revenge." The crowd seemed to collectively inhale, sensing the moral weight in Manny's decision. There were no explosions, no punches, no cinematic violence, yet the tension was suffocating, electric. Every eye, every camera, every heartbeat felt the gravity of what was happening. The officers finally lowered their eyes, stepping back fully now, the reality of the moment washing over them in waves of shame and disbelief. One whispered, barely audible, "Oh God, we didn't know." Manny remained silent for a heartbeat longer, letting the lesson sink in. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He merely stood there, the picture of discipline and control, the dog calmly at his side, waiting for justice to be done without the need for theatrics. Then he raised his gaze once more, sweeping the officers with a cold but measured stare. "If you were me," he said, voice calm yet carrying unmistakable authority, "would you show mercy or maximum discipline?" The question lingered in the air, a challenge, a moral test, and a call to conscience all at once. The crowd, the officers, even the agents, everyone felt it. The street was no longer a place of arrogance or bullying. It had become a stage for accountability, for quiet power, for the understanding that true authority requires neither noise nor fury. And as the black SUV's engine idled softly, the agents flanking Manny, and the officers trembling in front of him, one thing was certain: the truth had arrived. And it hit harder than any punch ever could. The street remained frozen in silence, the flashing lights of the patrol cars and the black SUV casting long, jagged shadows across the asphalt. Every person present, the crowd, the officers, the federal agents, seemed suspended in a moment of awe. Manny Pacquiao's calm presence dominated the scene. Every movement was deliberate, every step controlled, like a predator who didn't need to strike to assert authority. He began to walk toward the officers. Slow, measured, confident, not aggressive, not angry, just radiating an authority that made the previous moments of mockery and defiance look trivial. The broad officer shifted his weight nervously. The taller one swallowed hard. Both of them had assumed dominance just moments ago, but now their confidence crumbled under the sheer weight of Manny's presence. When he finally stopped a few feet away, his gaze swept over them, piercing but composed. The crowd instinctively stepped back, sensing that this was the pivotal moment. Manny's voice was calm, measured, yet it carried a gravity that made every word land with the force of finality. "I serve to protect people like you, and today you didn't protect anyone." The words were simple, but the meaning was devastating. They didn't need to be shouted. They didn't need to be dramatic. The officers' faces fell, their bravado evaporating instantly. Their eyes darted at each other, shame and fear replacing arrogance. One by one, their voices broke as they tried to speak. I'm sorry, sir," stammered the taller officer, barely audible. "We didn't know, we didn't realize," added the broad one, voice trembling. Manny's gaze remained steady, unwavering. He didn't celebrate their fear or humiliation. He wasn't here for revenge. His control, his discipline, his presence, all of it was about accountability, about teaching a lesson without chaos. He turned slightly toward the lead federal agent who had accompanied him. "Remove their badges. They're not fit to serve." The agent nodded immediately, his expression tight but obedient. Within moments, the two officers' insignias were stripped, their authority revoked. The look of disbelief on their faces was palpable. They had underestimated the quiet man standing before them, and now the consequences were irreversible. From the edge of the scene, a young, rookie officer stepped forward cautiously. He had not participated in the disrespect or escalation. Instead, he had observed, silent and composed, showing restraint even as his colleagues had acted recklessly. Manny's eyes met his, and for the first time in the tense confrontation, there was acknowledgement without judgment. "You showed control," Manny said softly, nodding toward the rookie. "You'll lead this precinct now." The rookie's eyes widened slightly, shock and honor mixing on his face. The crowd murmured quietly, sensing that justice had been served not only through consequence but also through recognition of virtue. Manny finally shifted his attention back to his dog. The animal had remained close, alert, but now it was safe, the tension easing slightly. He crouched down, gently lifting the dog into his arms. There was no anger in his touch, no aggression. Just calm, controlled care, a subtle display of emotion without chaos, a silent reaffirmation of his values. The dog nuzzled his shoulder, reassured, safe in the presence of its master. The crowd watched in quiet awe as Manny straightened, dog in arms, and began walking toward the edge of the street. There were no dramatic gestures, no shouting, no display of dominance beyond his natural composure. The sirens, the flashing lights, the tension, all of it faded as he moved with quiet authority. Each step was deliberate, controlled, a testament to the power of restraint. Bystanders whispered among themselves. "He didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't humiliate anyone," one said softly. "And yet, everyone here knows who won." "He doesn't need to prove anything," another added. "The control, the calm, that's what makes him powerful." Even the rookie officer, now standing in the precinct's shadow of authority, felt the weight of the lesson. True power, he realized, did not come from guns, badges, or aggression. It came from discipline, restraint, and the ability to act decisively without losing control. As Manny reached the edge of the street, he glanced back once, his expression unreadable but commanding respect. The crowd, still holding their phones, still recording, still staring, felt a strange mix of relief and awe. The officers, stripped of authority, lowered their heads, recognizing their failure without need for further words. He walked away quietly, dog cradled in his arms, leaving behind a scene transformed not by chaos, not by violence, but by the undeniable weight of controlled power. No one shouted, no one applauded. Yet every person present, from the trembling officers to the murmuring crowd, understood that justice had been delivered, and that discipline had triumphed where arrogance had failed. The lesson lingered in the air, heavier than any words could convey. Respect, restraint, and accountability had spoken louder than any siren, any weapon, any authority. And Manny Pacquiao, Delta Force commander, protector, and master of controlled power, had left a lasting mark, not with fury, but with silence. The street had emptied slowly after the confrontation, but the weight of what had just happened lingered like smoke. People still stood in clusters, whispering to one another, replaying every moment in their minds. Every phone recording, every glance, every gesture from earlier felt monumental now. It wasn't just a story of a man confronting reckless authority. It was a lesson written into the very air, a quiet teaching about respect, discipline, and true strength. Manny Pacquiao, dog in arms, had walked away without a word, leaving only the silent aftermath of controlled power. No dramatic gestures. No celebratory shouts. Just the calm, unwavering reminder that authority and strength were not measured in volume, intimidation, or aggression. The officers, shaken, humbled, and stripped of their symbols of power, could feel it even if they couldn't yet articulate it. Real strength was something they had never understood. In moments like these, a truth becomes undeniable. Respect should never depend on status, uniform, or perceived strength. The man in plain clothes, quiet and composed, had commanded attention, demanded accountability, and enforced justice, not through threats, not through fists, not through guns, but through discipline, clarity, and the calm authority that comes from mastery. He did not need to scream. He did not need to boast. And yet every action, every pause, every decision spoke louder than any shouting ever could. Humility, many forget, is often mistaken for weakness. But humility is not a lack of power. Humility is control. Humility is discipline. It is the ability to remain composed in the face of provocation, to assess a situation fully before responding, and to act decisively without letting emotion cloud judgment. Manny's calm care for his dog, his measured steps, his quiet interactions, his deliberate words, demonstrated more power than the officers' bravado, their badges, or their weapons ever could. Violence without reason, on the other hand, is never a sign of strength. It is always a mark of fear. The officers had attacked, mocked, and disrespected, believing their titles and their guns made them untouchable. In reality, their aggression exposed their insecurities, their lack of control, and their misunderstanding of what true authority means. By contrast, Manny's actions, precise, disciplined, controlled, taught a lesson that no physical altercation could have. Justice, he showed, could be delivered without chaos, and respect could be earned without force. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the deadliest one you'll ever meet. Not because he seeks conflict, but because he is prepared for it in ways no one else can imagine. Every subtle shift of posture, every measured word, every breath taken with deliberate control carries the power to command attention, enforce consequence, and change the course of events. The street, the officers, the bystanders, all had witnessed this truth firsthand. The lesson extends beyond law enforcement, beyond elite training, beyond street confrontations. It is universal. In workplaces, in classrooms, in families, in society at large, arrogance, aggression, and superficial displays of power are temporary. Calm, disciplined, and respectful behavior, humility grounded in strength, endures. It shapes environments. It earns loyalty. It inspires awe without fear. It leaves a legacy that loud voices and empty authority cannot match. Even the young rookie officer who had shown restraint now understood this. He had watched the controlled power of a true leader, a man whose skill and experience demanded obedience without intimidation. He had seen humility coupled with lethal capability. And he had learned that the best leaders do not crush people for ego. They guide, protect, and act decisively when necessary, but always with respect and measured judgment. Manny's departure from the scene left more than a cleared street. It left a lasting impression on everyone present. Onlookers would recount this story, not for the action itself, but for the lesson embedded in every measured step and every calm word. The dog at his side symbolized that care, restraint, and loyalty are integral to real strength. His silent authority taught that true power is invisible until it needs to be seen, and even then, it doesn't need fanfare to be undeniable. And now, the story leaves a choice to those witnessing it. How do we measure strength in our own lives? By aggression, by intimidation, by the volume of our voices or the flash of our achievements? Or do we measure strength by our ability to remain calm under pressure, to act with integrity, to demand respect without arrogance, and to enforce justice without malice? The answer is clear. Real strength is calm. Real strength is controlled. Real strength is respectful. And this is where you, the audience, become part of the lesson. Reflect on what you just witnessed. Think about how you respond to confrontation, provocation, or disrespect. Consider how humility, restraint, and discipline can shape your own life, and the lives of those around you. If you believe, as Manny demonstrated, that real strength is calm, controlled, and respectful, then take a moment to show it. Let the lesson resonate. Share it. Stand by it. Type honor if you believe in true strength, the strength that does not shout, does not strike out of ego, and does not demand recognition. Type honor to celebrate calm, disciplined, and respectful power. Because true authority doesn't need to announce itself. It is recognized in silence. It is felt in discipline. And it is respected in every heart that understands the weight of calm, controlled power. The street had cleared. The officers had learned their lesson. The crowd had witnessed a masterclass in discipline and humility. And Manny Pacquiao, the quietest man in the room, the most lethal force under control, the protector of what was innocent, had left, his presence lingering in the minds of everyone who had seen him in action. The lesson would endure. The strength would resonate. And the story, carried through whispers and recordings, would remind everyone, respect, humility, and discipline are far stronger than rage, arrogance, or superficial power.